Hi there, Agile friends. I'll come in here just with a quick note to let you know that the Agile Online Summit 2022 is coming soon. To know more, check out bit.ly/AOS2022. That's all one word, all lowercase, bit.ly/AOS2022. Now, stick around to the end of the episode if you want to know more, but for now, on to the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our TGIF episode, also the Product Owner episode, this week with Robbie Ross. Hey, Robbie, welcome back.
Thank you. Happy Friday, everybody.
Happy Friday. And it's time to bring up the story pints again. I mean, after all, it is Friday, so it's definitely a couple of pints down in the pub after work are in order. But Robbie, before all of that, let's talk about product owners. And we'll, of course, talk about a great product owner example at the end of the show. But let's start with the opposite of that. What might have been potentially the worst product owner anti-pattern you've witnessed in your career?
Yeah, so I do have to start by saying I do have some sympathy for product owners. It's a tricky and demanding role. Often product owners inexplicably find themselves in this role due to some form of Scrum adoption across the organization, and they don't have too much of an understanding of the role and accountabilities. However, one of the biggest anti-pattern is one I often hear, not just on this podcast, is around the absent product owner. We've heard it many times on this podcast, but it's such a the one that rarely turns up or interacts with other team members or provides any form of vision. In doing so, the backlog is filled with more questions as about the why, why we're planning on doing this piece of work than having anything ready. I tend to find that the absent product owners as well may pop in now and again with status updates and not be fully included as part of the team. It's great to see that the latest edition of the Scrum Guide has the product owner within the team, so that's obviously something to focus on. But if the product owner is absent in any way, I deem this as an early warning sign. Now, this has happened to me previously on one of our teams, and the solution I found was really simple. Talk to them. So in this instance, just by talking to the PO and the time, I found that they were involved in other teams. They had some additional priorities and are able to give, the time to the team that is required. So to provide an option for this, we identified that, there was a little bottleneck. So we looked into dedicating certain days or times that we can, whereby the team can ensure that they'll get 100% from the PO at that time. We can build on that over the team, but it's a great starting point that we did have. Additionally, I mentioned as well as part of the intro that a lot of product owners inexplicably find themselves in the role. So they were part of that organization that needed a PO. So they're kind of thrown into it. They'd be given the responsibility without too much of an introduction. They weren't fully aware of their role accountabilities within the Scrum team and how pivotal it is to the success of those Scrum teams. So a small solution to that, not quite a racy matrix that we did have, but we used something similar that we started to understand their accountabilities, and that was really helpful for them to start off with. A further reason that we identified as well was for their absence was that they weren't confident enough in taking part in the events like the sprint planning because they didn't think they had the answers to be able to ask there and then. And that was a really intriguing point for me as well, is that we discussed just by simply being part of that conversation, even if you had to use some takeaway points, that was much better than not being there at all. And we talked yesterday about momentum, and I've mentioned that how pivotal that is to Scrum Master. The same must be said for the PO. The same must be said if you are new to the role, if you are new to the teams, building that momentum with the teams it's so important as well. So just by not being there is more detrimental than being there without the answers.
And that is a very good point. I mean, one of the things that I see as going through this question often in this podcast, and then I write the show notes to kind of summarize what the guests have said. And one of the things that comes up very often is that typically great POs are people who have not necessarily had any technical background, that have a lot more questions than they have answers. They are also relentless about figuring out the answers, but they are there. They are present. So that's one, which you were alluding to. But also they are present because they don't have the answers.
Totally.
Right? But here's the thing. They very often don't even have the questions. It's the team that has the questions. And I start to think like as one of the key characteristics of great product owners is the ability to figure out what are the questions that need to be answered. It's not about knowing the answer. It's about even knowing the question, right? And a bad product owner is, and we've heard it here on the podcast as well many times, is somebody who thinks they know all the answers, even though there might be no questions yet.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're exactly right, is that they might not know the answers. They might not know the questions, but by being there, being part of that conversation, essentially builds momentum, essentially builds that understanding of, what the teams are thinking, what the individuals within the teams are thinking, what the stakeholders are thinking. So yeah, I think just by being part of the conversation is absolutely, rule number one for a product owner.
And being part of the conversation is also something that we as Scrum Masters should be very good at. And what you just said also describes that not only do we need to be good at it, being part of the conversation, but we need to be good at bringing others on board with the conversation, in this case, the product owner. And this reminds me, I think it was in this year's, that would be 2022 for those listening to us in the future. This year's Scrum Master Summit, we were exactly talking about the idea that the Scrum Master needs to be part of, but also catalyst for critical conversations within the organization that help the team, that help the product owner, that help even other teams. But this being part of the conversation, which is another form of being present that you were describing for product owners, is really a critical skill we need to develop as Scrum Masters, and also bring others on, the conversations that we need to be part of.
Absolutely. Certainly.
So talking about conversations, it's time to shift to another conversation. The mirror image of what we just described would be a great PO, right? Like somebody who's always present and has that momentum. But what other things define a great PO for you, Robbie?
Yeah, so I've mentioned that the product owner is such a pivotal role. So, someone who can clearly define that vision, someone who anticipates some of the end user needs, but also facilitating that iterative backlog and having that mindset that we'll do small things along the way. Then what comes next are some of the soft skills that are so important to the team. So I once worked with a product owner on a project to build out a mobile application to effectively replicate the functionality from the desktop app. Something that's not too uncommon that we hear within teams, the dreaded lift and shift. Now, this PO itself was so vital to the success of the mobile app that they understood not only that it wasn't possible to replicate all the functionality of the desktop to the mobile app, it may have not been practical. They provided what in terms of the functionality, but they allowed the teams the freedom and the space to provide the how. Iteratively development was so crucial to them because they were in constant communication with the end users, even before sprint reviews, constantly throughout the weeks. They built an excellent relationship and got that through that iterative development, that buy-in from the stakeholders on all of the major decisions. They allowed the team to really minimize that feedback loop and gather reactions on what they were doing there and then. And on top of this, they insisted on having a real metric-driven approach to development that they were determined to stand by those decisions as well. So
can you give us an example of what that metric approach looked like?
So we used metrics in terms of, as it was a new mobile app, we wanted to understand some of the UI and user experience. So where people were going on from the login page, for example, where they were going, what page were they doing, what pages they weren't using, what screens they weren't using, what functionality they were using, and when. So that could drive behavior and some of the user experience as well. And this allowed the team to truly understand how it was being used and where to focus the efforts or where not to focus, rather than guessing. So the metrics were there to back up where to work, really. So these strategy techniques were really useful to the team and essential to what helped build a really successful mobile apps. But it was the soft skills that helped the team. They were always approachable and always on time to answer any questions. The team trusted their decisions because they could back up with some of the data. They could see why they were making the decisions, as opposed to the decisions and not really having the buy-in. We communicated that across the teams. They understood that they needed to place a lot of the decisions where the information was into the team. So how we would do something is absolutely a team decision. They understood the technology more than anybody else. So what we were going to be using, as they had that transparency as well between the stakeholders and the team on the strategy and the vision, this allowed the whole team that autonomy to select the enhancements, whilst they were still guiding them towards that vision, of course, but they allowed that autonomy to work on something next. So if there was a bit of free time, there was a bit of gap in anything that they worked on, it was a case of what do you think? It was encouraged to come to the product owner or to come to stand up on what to work next, or conversations across the team, that it was encouraged to actually think for yourselves and have that autonomy to select what you were working on. They ensured that communication and collaboration was at the foundation of everything that we're doing, rather than dictating that work essentially that we do have. Allowed it to really
talking
thrive.
About communication and collaboration is something that I think it will resonate with a lot of our listeners. But I want to drill into that a little bit more, because it's not just communication and collaboration, because there's good and bad communication. There's good and bad collaboration. I do want to highlight some of the aspects that you mentioned. So building a relationship with stakeholders, right? That's good communication. Like, you need to spend time. You need to actually make an effort to build that relationship, right? They need to trust you. You need to trust them. That's work that needs to be done. And it's done through communication, right? It's not abstract. It's not just any communication. It's about building trust between specific people that need to make decisions, sometimes together, sometimes separately, but they need to always be aligned on those decisions, right? And then the same with the team of knowing where the team, where it's the team's role to make a decision, and knowing where is the product owner's role to make a decision. Like you said, the team trusted the product owner because they always had a good explanation as to why they had come to that conclusion, right? And very often we talk about communication and collaboration as very abstract concepts, but they are not abstract at all. They are the opposite of abstract. They are extremely practical. And of course, if you haven't paid attention yet, do rewind a little bit and listen to the examples that Robbie was sharing, because those examples are what communication and collaboration are all about.
Yeah, and to drill down a little bit more about the communication and collaboration within the teams, the one thing that they did have was curiosity. Curiosity, you mentioned about asking the right questions or not, maybe not having the right questions or answers. The curiosity built, that common understanding across the team. It's always okay to ask why. It's always, why would you ask? You hear things like the 5 whys in terms of drilling down into something. Why would you do it this way? Well, okay, why? And having that curiosity as a product owner was so good across the team, because it allowed the freedom for the teams to work on what they would like, but obviously something towards to achieve the sprint goal,
and to bring their creativity, because they have creativity in a domain that the product owner doesn't necessarily have.
Absolutely. It was it was a pleasure to work with that product owner, and the success of the product was parallel towards that as well. So
absolutely. Robbie, unfortunately, we're getting close to the end. It was a wonderful story about a great product owner. Thank you for sharing that. But before we do go, where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yes, so I am on LinkedIn, try to be as active as possible on there. So yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I am relatively new to setting up a Twitter profile, so bear with me on that one, but I will share that when I do have it. But for the time being, certainly LinkedIn. And if anybody does have any questions or any curiosity in the work that we are doing, please do reach out, and we can certainly start that conversation.
Absolutely. So do reach out to Robbie Ross on LinkedIn. The link will be in the show notes so that you can easily find it and get in touch. Robbie, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Thanks, Vasco. Appreciate the invite. It's been a pleasure.
Hi there, Agile friends. Thank you for sticking around to know more about this year's Agile Online Summit. The summit will have 4 keynotes and 4 tracks you will not want to miss. The keynotes will touch on critical topics for us, from delivering on time to helping you to focus on sustainability. The 4 tracks are tools, so we'll focus on tools you need to excel at your job, but also your mission. We'll also have a track on sustainability, which is, of course, about people and their sustainable pace, but it's also about how do we bring sustainability to the products and the planet we inhabit. We'll have a 3rd track about happiness, talking about doing what we love and, most crucially, loving what we do. And finally, the 4th track will be live. It will be mostly hands-on sessions to help you roll up your sleeves together with the presenters. Oh, and we will also have a coaching clinic, as we usually do, organized to help you discuss and get inspired to solve the hardest challenges you face at work. This year, we'll have a special emphasis on interaction with your peers, so get your ticket and join the Slack at bit.ly/AOS 2022. As always, we have free tickets for anyone that wants to attend live, and the VIP tickets for those of you who want to keep the videos forever. So check them out at bit.ly/AOS 2022. I'll see you on the conference floor. One more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast is over, but there's a lot more we have to share. We have developed our own membership site where you find a community of active and engaged Scrum Masters. In this site, you get access to exclusive content and get to interact with us, your podcast hosts, as well as the best Scrum Masters in the world. Join us at scrummastertoolbox.com/podcast and keep this podcast free of advertising. See you next week for one more week full of Scrum Master tips and tricks. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.